Hi, Neil.
Shalom, Heli.
You have reached chapter 20 in the podcast Upskill Yourself. We are still with our special guest, Jessica Gerard, who's not entirely fluent in Hebrew, so we're going to be doing this podcast episode also in English. Jessica will, in a minute, introduce herself again, but I'll just say that today we're going to talk about practical tools for relationship building across cultures, surprising language paradox, and tips for managing across cultures. So, Jessica, tell us about yourself.
Yes. Hi. Wonderful. So glad to be here. So for 15 years, I directed academic programs at a number of universities, including Columbia, University of Arizona. I'm the founder of J. Gerard Consulting here in Silicon Valley. I coach internationals here, cultural training for the workplace, and so excited to be here.
יאללה, התחלנו.
So Jessica, if you could tell international one thing before they start working in English.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I'm going to say something. Internationals, I have spoken with them about how nervous. You know what? I have to change. I have to change this. This is what I want to tell native speakers of English before they work with internationals. This is what I want to tell Americans. You need to please have respect for how hard it is to navigate socially in a second language. You need to have compassion, really, for that. And you need to understand that just because someone has beautiful vocabulary or beautiful grammar, people are not teaching them culture. Teaching about cultural, intercultural communication, that doesn't happen. That's not going to happen in your high school classroom. And, to internationals, to remember, you may feel like your English is really beautiful, and that could be dangerous for you, because if your English happens to be really excellent, but you don't have the cultural piece, they will hold you responsible, and they will think that you are being aggressive on purpose. If you, for example, if you're not aware of that cultural piece.
So there's a paradox.
It is a paradox.
Better English you have,
yes,
the more you're expected to understand the culture.
Perfect.
Okay, I won't work on my English. Yeah, okay.
Honestly, sometimes that gives you the biggest pass.
Yeah.
And it's amazing though, because I have people come to me all the time for language training, and they want to perfect their language. Please
Don't.
also learn about the culture.
Yeah, I have to say, I've been working with Jessica. She's been helping me perfect my English, and I'm doing cultural training with her. So having come here from Israel and wanting to work here. So once she explained the paradox to me, ever since then, when I talk to Americans and people tell me, you have good English, and I'm like, okay.
You're like, oh no.
And then every time I make a mistake in English, I take on it, and I exploit it, and I say, okay, yeah, I just got here. I don't really know how things work, and then I feel that the other side suddenly has a lot more patience. They're so super nice, super helpful. Mm-hmm. So when Brené Brown always talks about vulnerability. When you show your vulnerability, everything changes and the other side becomes more empathical. So if there's one tip I have here, being here for 5 months and starting to work with Americans, that would be it. To just show that you don't know everything, because sometimes us Israelis, we come so confident, so dougly, so, so direct. And when we show that we're not know-it-alls, then we get more empathy from the other side.
Yeah, humility is a very respected trait.
Yeah.
So what I understand, and it's important for me, that first of all, if you make mistakes in English, you become more humble, because you listen to your mistakes, and also sometimes you search for the right word in order to pronounce or deliver what you really want to say. And the second thing is, don't put your energy or your attention on grammar.
Yes.
Put it on listening skills.
Yes.
Try to listen to the other side. And while you listen and improve your listening skills, your language will be better.
It will. Definitely. And I think it's also important to be listening and also, get some support with, I'll give you an example. Let's say you learn how to say a sentence like, instead of, I don't like that idea, to say, I'm not sure that'll work. I don't think this is working so well. Like make an effort if you're going to learn English, make an effort to learn those phrases. Now, imagine if you say, I'm not sure this is working. Imagine you say, I am not sure this working. That is a grammatical mistake in it, but you're better off. You're honestly better off because people will read you. I'm not sure this working now. They'll read you as more culturally they'll feel that you're respectful. So as an English professor of English, I say to people, stop worrying about grammar so much. Worry about what's culturally right to say.
Yeah, that's an aha moment right here.
Yeah, because clients will come to me and they'll be like, let's do grammar. And I'm like, okay. And sometimes it's important, right? The difference between this doesn't work and this isn't working. Sure.
And Jessica, how does it appear in writing emails and WhatsApp? Another 5 hours?
I can make a quick statement. This is the main message that we give to Israelis. When you're writing the English and American style of communication, it's very organized and it's very much adding extra content in there. So start off by saying, this is with respect to X issue, give a little bit more of the background, make your requests politely, do it in an organized way. Israelis have been told that sometimes they'll send very kind of super quick messages. Now, again, as you develop relationships with people, obviously you're going to be using Slack and writing back and forth very quickly. So it depends on where you are. But I mean, there's a lot you can say about this. Another thing I'd like to add is that in English-speaking cultures, it's very common to have a meeting and then elect someone to take the notes and send out, a very, very neat, beautiful, organized summary with a to-do list. And I'm wondering if in Israel, I get the sense that sometimes isn't, maybe it is, but maybe, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's actually funny because Israelis should do it. If you're a very organized manager, you would do it. But I think a lot of meetings, people don't do that. You each write your own notes. And if you're very organized and you have someone managing everything, they will take responsibility on it. But sometimes these are the exact moments where things get lost.
Yeah. And just to add to that, when you have cultures that are very relationship dependent and heavy, and Israel falls a bit on that side, trust is formed a lot by like spending time together in relationships and talking and yelling. Sorry, the yelling part. But I'm going to think of an example from Indonesia or Saudi Arabia. There were times when there are case studies where someone from Saudi Arabia will be working with someone from the United States or Germany. And at the end of a meeting, they send this Indonesian or this Saudi Arabian a list of everything they talked about and things that they need to do. And the other side is very insulted. Why are they insulted? They're insulted because the thinking is, don't you trust me? Like, what is this ridiculous bureaucracy? You don't think I took notes? And so it's these are just cultural approaches and beliefs and values that it's important to understand.
So is it okay that let's step back a moment to talk about language? And what is the relationships between language and culture?
Okay. There are PhDs and doctoral dissertations, that can't even scratch the surface of that. One thing that I think is really useful for our conversation, especially thinking about the workplace, is that it's very hard to understand a word if you don't know the culture. Things are not going to make sense to you. So let's talk about relationship building in the office. Americans like to engage in small talk. Israelis talk also. There's humor, there's talking, there's offsites, there's onsites, there's Zoom, whatever. And a lot of the time, a lot gets lost in translation because you don't know the culture around a specific word. May I share one example?
Please.
Of course.
Okay. So I know we have a lot of Israelis in the audience. You may, and I'll explain to everyone else. There's a song by a group called Hatikva Shesh.
Yes.
And it's called, can you pronounce it?
Ha'ivrit ha'chadasha, the new Hebrew.
Yeah, but it's another one. It's Achi Israeli.
Oh, Achi Israeli.
Thank you. So it's
the most Israeli
exactly.
thing.
So for our non-Hebrew speakers in the audience, it's this wonderful song, and you have to see it, about what's super Israeli, and it's a recent song. And so the whole video is adorable, and they're talking about all these great things that are Israeli with great pride. I love this. I'll give you an example. Like they say, what's Israeli? When you land in a plane and everyone claps their hands, you know, that's an Israeli thing.
Yeah.
So I want to just give you one quick example. There was a sentence that I misunderstood because I didn't have context. And I swear this relates to the workplace. So there's a line in the song. And again, the song is just of this multitude of things that are just very Israeli. Not stereotypically Israeli, really. Also just like truly the modern Israel. And so they have this line, and the guy is just singing out phrases that Israelis like to say. And one of them is, can you read that, Ellie?
אני פורק סחורה.
Okay. So I'll tell you how I understood that. I did a couple of translations, and I thought he was saying, I'm unloading my feelings. Like, I'm going to tell you some stuff about how I feel. And then the next part of the song, he was just talking about some stuff that he felt. I am unloading. In English, you could say, I'm unloading my feelings. I'm venting my feelings. I'm expressing myself. What did it really mean?
I'm unloading goods from a truck or my car.
Okay. So what it really means is, hey, leave me alone. I'm unloading stuff. I can leave my car here. Don't tell me to move my car. I'm leaving it by the side of the road. And that made sense to you, right?
Yeah, of course. There's an Israeli song about it that was funny.
Okay.
To tell the inspector not to give me a ticket.
Yes.
I'm unloading, so it's funny for Israelis.
But here's the thing. It's much, much, much deeper than that. I think what that really speaks to is this Israeli tendency of, look, life is tough. You got to do what you got to do. You have to break the laws sometimes. You have to advocate. Leave me alone, please. Just give me another minute. Give me another 5 minutes. Let me do this contract. Let me do this deal. It's an approach. It's an Israeli approach that doesn't make as much sense to Americans in their orderliness. Okay. So when you have a workplace where someone is saying, no, just give me 5 more minutes. Let me do this. Let me do that. Let me try this new thing. And the American, or maybe the Asian, perhaps we'll talk, is more used to, well, we made a plan. And I believe you're acting in an immature way because that's how teenagers act. Where an Israeli might say, this is how you get through life. This is intelligence.
In order to get through things, you need to break the ruls, not to break the rules, to cut corners.
You have to ask for what you need, and you have to advocate for yourself and not be embarrassed. I get the sense that Israelis feel it's an honorable thing to be able to advocate for yourself because you will get things done for your company.
Yeah.
To an American, I'm going to be honest, if we're in Israel and some Israeli is in our way and they're like, I'm just unloading stuff, we will think they're very rude.
Yeah.
So this definitely applies to the workplace. And I just think it's really kind of cute and funny that when I heard that line, the only thing I could understand was it was translated as I'm unloading. I'm just unloading. And my American brain had no context for any of this. And I was like, oh, he's expressing his feelings. And we lose so much. So your original question was, what is the relationship between language and culture? There's no language without culture. No word has any meaning unless you can look at all the culture that surrounds it.
From what I understand from this perfect example is that culture, which is a collection of behaviors, is based on language, and language designs the pattern of thinking. Because the example you just gave is that the American doesn't understand this pattern of thinking, and the Israeli living on this pattern of thinking of, I have to try to make a combination. Everything must be flexible. It's all about agility. And it's not in the scope, and it doesn't work in the mind of other people's culture.
Yeah.
And I think that also grammar, we spoke about it when we prepared this podcast, define the way of we think. Because if I think in Hebrew, the pattern I think that we talked about before, but decision making is totally different if I think in English, which has, I think, 60 times more words than Hebrew, which means everything is more precise and more delicate. And for example, if I think in German, the way the sentence is built, the grammar is totally different. So it's all affect our mind and the way we perceive the world.
Definitely, that you've hit on a very hot topic in linguistics, but without a doubt, our cultural beliefs are reflected in our grammar patterns, and different languages ask us to do certain things to get our point across. So yes, essentially, I think that's a very, very good point. Now, just to add something about Hebrew is an amazing language because it has this immense depth. It has words that are so ancient in it, yet it was recreated very recently. So in some ways, you have words that have deep cultural meanings that go back so far that all Hebrew speakers understand. And then you have other instances where you just don't have the right word in Hebrew, and you had to borrow from English because it's.
Oh, can you give an example, please?
Yesh li delay. What's the whole song? Ani jet lag, overweight, handbag.
Yeah. Wi-Fi,
asafti mailim. There's like millions of them, right?
A lot.
Yes.
Like accountability,
focus, stress.
Yeah.
Let's see, we can think of more.
Engagement. You can't translate engagement. You can't translate setting. What's the setting of the meeting? It's like,
Well, Jessica, while you were speaking, I just remember an example from 2 days ago. My wife, she's an most talented and perfect singer in Israel, my opinion, of course. And she right now prepared to perform a concert in Ladino.
Oh, wow.
And it's a totally brand new language for her. She used to speak, she used to sing, she's singing in Spanish. But Ladino is different because it's the Jewish Spanish. And it took her half a year to learn the words, and because she's singing, she has to interpret the meaning of the lyrics and the meaning of the words. And Ladino has a aroma, a sense that you can't sense it in other language. And one day I caught her cooking and singing.
Wow.
And while she was cooking and making the food and stirring the whatever she was cooking, she was singing, and it was like the movement create the language, or the language created the movement. It was so beautiful.
Wow, that's amazing. Did she happen to be cooking anything inspired by Ladino cuisine?
Well, her mother is from Syrian. So Syrian is close to the Balkan countries where Ladino was spread all over. So I believe the smells are similar.
Wow. That's a beautiful
And I told
story.
her, please go ahead, sing all the time Ladino while you're cooking. It tastes better.
Wow.
So I have I want us to move on to some tips. Okay. If you are a manager,
yes,
Israeli manager managing Americans, Israeli American managing Israeli,
yes,
what kind of tips can you give them in order to have a good relationship and go through all the challenges successfully?
Well, the first thing I want to say is please consider taking time to do this kind of work and training and thinking with your team, because you have these people who are with you who are experts in whatever you guys are doing, software development or new water resource. But this is a whole new world. It's a whole new universe of knowledge, and I think people really need support. So I would say, don't put all the pressure on yourself as managers. I genuinely, there's ways, there's different means to bring someone in or to get a conversation started and get this kind of coaching. You could do a group of Israelis just by themselves, and then a group of Americans by themselves, and everyone can vent, and then you can combine them all. So support for yourself And because it's very awkward. What I find is that individual clients will come to me suffering on their own and feeling this weight of responsibility on them. So that's a general tip. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you think? I have lots of things.
I think managers a lot of times have trouble or are struggling with connection.
Yes.
So especially working remotely.
Yeah.
And they're always trying to think about the way to connect people. And I think that if you have your team sit and talk about culture,
yes,
have everyone, tell stories about their culture or explain things, about themselves and about the way they were brought up. I think that it can make a lot of connection and can give context to things. So, you can do many things that are, short and fun and, and make the connections.
Absolutely.
Nir, you have an idea?
Yeah, I think about case studies. All the time to bring up case studies about interculture
I have a good
sessions or situations, or even analyze your emails and do it ongoing. And first of all, you're going to feel you're not alone in this situation. And second, you feel like you are getting advices and other opinions from other people. And especially, Haley, we talked about it when we spoke about inclusion. If your team is diversity.
What do you mean about when you say diversity? What do you mean?
Different people from different cultures in the same team. That's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, America, we are right now helping create really diverse and really supported groups and really inclusive work environments is very important in the United States right now. And it should include internationals. Without a doubt, it should include internationals and that type of inclusivity and that creating comfortable situations for them. May I share a quick case?
Of course.
Okay. So I think this, what's funny, I've had clients report some version of this case many times, and I'll tell you about a specific one. It involves a manager, a performance review, and an employee. An employee came to me and said they had a really, really confusing performance review from their manager. Okay. The client was Israeli, Russian actually, and the manager was American. The American manager said to the Israeli, "You don't follow directions." Now that was a really frightening thing for this Israeli to hear.
And that's a direct feedback.
Yeah. By the way, that's, and I don't know how the Americans said it actually. Probably something like, "Here's something good. And now I need to talk to you about something. I feel like there were some times when you didn't listen to directions. Here's an example." That's how they would say it.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, the employee kind of panicked and came to me and we started talking and the whole story unfolded. I talked to both sides. Essentially what had happened, here's a specific example. The American manager said to the Israeli, "Hey, we're giving a presentation tomorrow. Would you mind looking over the figures on the first slide? Or would you consider," I think he said, "would you consider looking over the figures on the first slide?" Now, to the American manager, it was extremely clear what he was saying. Do you understand what he was saying, Kelly?
Yeah, he was saying, please change.
Yeah.
Change
this. You need to look at the first slide and you need to change this. Now, the Israeli, who actually had very good English, what did the Israeli? The Israeli heard, "It's a suggestion."
Yeah, think about it.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do it, don't do it. If you think you should, then do it. It's a suggestion.
Exactly. And the language was really like, "Would you consider taking a look at the figures on slide 1?" And again, to an American, you gave a specific slide and a specific set of directions. I mean, it was very clear.
But you said consider.
Yeah.
Consider looking at it. Right. So I considered. I said, okay. Yeah. I considered. Right. And then looking at it, I looked at it again and it looked okay. So I can go on with my life.
That's exactly what happened. So the Israeli considered it, decided not to. Now, here's the interesting thing. Because they thought it was a suggestion, they didn't really send a follow-up email. They could have said, "Hey, just so you know, I decided the figures are fine." Mm-hmm. Or, Just so you know, I decided I don't think we need to look over it. So to the manager, American manager working with Israeli, it seemed very obvious when they were asked to look at the data. I told him to do X and he didn't do X and he didn't even tell me why. That's really disrespectful. And the Israeli is like, oh my, no, that's not what happened. Right?
You didn't tell me to do that.
Exactly.
We have a shared colleague that told very crazy story where she was an HR manager and she was sitting in the office and a few people came and said, okay, we're going to Starbucks to have coffee. Do you want anything?
Yeah, and let me add, she was the office manager and it was her job to make sure everyone had everything they needed, their comforts, their food.
Yeah.
Their stuff. Okay, and then a group of them come up and they're like, want to go to Starbucks? And
she said, no, I'm okay. Thank you.
All the people in the office were American. She was, I think, the only Israeli.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then she figured out somehow that there's not enough milk left. So they had to go to Starbucks to get milk.
Yes.
But they didn't say, hey, there's not milk. The milk is over. Can you get more milk? Yeah. It's your job. Get milk, Yeah. So, and it's like sometimes, and as an Israeli, you feel like you need to, be like a researcher, understanding something that is so far from what the person said to you.
Yeah.
It's like it can be really hard.
It's exhausting, and it can also seem like you don't know when to trust Americans. You're not sure when they're being honest. And here's the thing with people. Once you decide that someone is not always honest or not honest, everything they do after that is going to look dishonest because we see and we hear what we know.
Yeah.
And so I say to managers, we're talking about tips for managers to be aware. Okay, that's a story about coffee, and coffee and milk is very important. And here in America, you need your oat milk and your non-dairy milk and your this milk and your that milk and your keto milk and your no pachmimot milk.
And your half and half.
And your half and half. But this is really high stakes. This is not a joke when you're talking. I mean, all relationships are important. Forgive me. I'm not denigrating what an office manager does. It's very important. But I mean, if you're talking about a performance review, it's very important that managers get training on how these cultural issues can affect performance reviews.
Yes.
Okay. Especially if you're doing 360 feedback and everyone's giving different reviews and then maybe your interpretation is called into question. It's very, very important. And by the way, you shouldn't be doing this on your own. People go and get doctorates and masters in this to figure out how to handle intercultural interpretation and feedback. Okay. So just one more thing I want to add. I am worried, sometimes there is a little generalizing when we talk about different cultures. So of course, all people within cultures are different. Here's the other thing I want you to know. The things that we're talking about today, these big differences with directness or leadership style, it's very, very, very important to understand them at the beginning when you're forming relationships with people you don't know. I do want to assure everyone that relationships will form, you will become friends, and you will, over time, have an easier time turning to your colleague and saying, I don't know if I like that idea. I don't want this to create fear. I want it to be understood that understand, have empathy, compassion for how the other thinks, especially at the beginning. And your relationship will grow, and we are all people. So eventually, the friendships that are going to form, the friendships, because we're human beings. But with this cultural knowledge, you won't scare anyone away. You won't burn the bridge too early.
I also think that if I'm a manager and I have a relationship with a different culture person, mm-hmm. I can, after hearing this podcast, I can always start over. Mm-hmm. I listen to this podcast and I get that there are differences and sometimes I might interpret you differently and it can open a conversation about it and then you can start over.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an opportunity.
Yeah. See, my mom loves my husband now. See, always.
I agree so much. It's all about awareness. It's about internal awareness and external awareness.
So let's talk about leadership.
Okay.
I know that there are a lot of differences in leadership style where you have different cultures. So can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So, one of the dimensions that varies greatly across culture is what people think makes a good leader, and even within a country, right? Within America, we have lots of different approaches to how you would lead and different metaphors. But there is a lot of variation globally. And to me, it's really important to talk about, because once you understand a country's underlying leadership style, a lot of their other behavior makes sense and falls into place. I think it's really important.
Can you give an example?
I can actually, yeah. So I was going to just explain a little bit about the two different poles. So let me just start before I give my example. I just want to explain what the spectrum looks like. So if you imagine, a spectrum of behaviors on a line, all the way, let's say, to the left is what we would call a very egalitarian style. So that would look like, a leader who sees themselves as a facilitator and as an equal. Okay, so I'll give you an example. You walk into a room in an egalitarian country, to a place of business, and you look into a meeting room and you see a table, and you don't know who the leader is necessarily. They might actually just be sitting down and they're dressed like everyone else, and everyone is sort of speaking to each other more or less in the same way. That's very egalitarian. And all the way on the other end of the spectrum is what we would call a hierarchical approach to leadership. So even just hearing the word hierarchy, what do you think when you hear that, Hallie?
Yeah, I think military. I think I think Asians like very, very hierarchy.
I think about Putin.
Putin.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So actually, all of this is true. So again, let me just backtrack and say, all humans, we have our distinct natures and our differences, and we're individuals, but we are inside a culture that decided upon a set of rules so that we could all not kill each other, basically. So yes, it's certainly true that when you look at East Asian countries, South Asian countries, India, South Asian, East Asia would be Japan and Korea, China, it's very hierarchical. So let me tell you what that would look like. Imagine we're entering a meeting room in a Chinese company, maybe a little more traditional Chinese company, and you would know right away who the boss is or the most senior person. They would be sitting in a very special seat. And it would be, I believe, right next to the door or second next to the door. And you would know by the way that they're dressed, and you would know by the way that they're speaking. And you would notice that when people address each other, they're using titles. They're referring to their positions. And you would also notice who's asking the questions and who is answering them. In a hierarchical place, the leader asks the questions and makes decisions, and other people follow suit. Where do you guys suppose America falls on this spectrum? If you have very egalitarian, like Sweden, the Nordic countries, they're very egalitarian, very fair. And on the other side, maybe we have Japan or China. Where is the US?
I believe in the middle.
Middle to the hierarchy, I think.
That's interesting. They're middle, but actually, it's funny. In some ways, they're a little more egalitarian.
Really?
Or they like to a little north of egalitarian, a little to the left.
Jessica,
Yeah.
I think it's because the sugar cup.
Oh.
Why is that? Tell us more.
Because this sugar cup effect moves them a bit north, like you said.
Yeah.
But it's so, it's so ordered, and it has a process, and everyone knows their place. So that's the hierarchy for me.
So it's a very good point. So typically what we find with the United States, and that's why it's really nice to think of this spectrum, the US is usually in the middle. In the middle of, we have Sweden on one side, very, very egalitarian and fair, Denmark. And then all the way on the other side, we have Japan. When you talk about directness, Israel is the most direct culture in the world. Japan is the least, and America's right in the middle. So it's always a nice thing to remember, folks, is that the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, typically they fall in the middle. So we wanted to talk about an example of maybe what could happen when these two...
Where does the Israelis...
Oh, of course. And where do the Israelis fall? The Israelis are...
Between the egalitarian and the American.
Exactly.
Right in the middle between those.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's funny because Israel does have the influence of the army in some ways, but Israelis are known as very, very informal and very direct, and also able to express themselves emotionally. To Israelis, you're like, whatever, we're not. But to other cultures who are watching Israelis talk, it sometimes looks like they're arguing. So Israelis are very interesting to study and work with because they're extremes. They are always at the very end or near the very end of the spectrum. So Israelis are pretty egalitarian. Pretty much the boss is willing to take questions from the workers. He doesn't mind a little criticism. Everyone's kind of thinking together. Everyone's throwing out ideas. That's what egalitarian looks like.
I can see it when I facilitate workshop in remote and using like the Zoom, and I see the background people choose in order to introduce themselves. Usually the Israeli guys, the Israeli managers, they don't use any background. You can see what's going behind. Sometimes they eat while the workshop. Everything is informal.
Yeah.
And the other side, like you said, American people, and it's also, I think there's a difference between north and east.
Yeah, there are definitely regional variations in the United States, definitely.
They are more formal. There's a background usually with the logo of the company, or they put a virtual background of a meeting room, and everything is like more with a distance. And
yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah. So without a doubt, when we speak to many Americans and they reflect on their experience in an Israeli office or working with Israelis, there's this feeling of it's less formal and you are a little more able, again, to like say what you think to the boss, right? And Americans are kind of in the middle there. And then when you move all the way over to people who are coming from Asia and from India, there's a lot of deference to the boss. And it's really important when we talk about Israelis interacting with Americans, especially if they're coming here to Silicon Valley, you are interacting with Americans, people who are very newly arrived from Asia, people very newly arrived from India, and there's very big gaps there. So I can share an example now of a cultural clash. There is a story of a man from, in this case, there's a couple of cases, from Sweden. So we already said very egalitarian, right? He was a great leader. He was a great manager, got wonderful reviews from everyone. People felt that he respected them and he listened to them and he was organized and etc. And he was transferred over to an Asian country to help with a team there. And they were really, really unhappy with him. They really doubted his leadership skills. They couldn't understand why during a meeting he would say, "So, what do you think? What do you think the initiative should be?
Wow.
Do you disagree with that?" It was very disconcerting to them, and it actually caused them to lose faith in this person's abilities. It was not a normal thing for a leader to say, "I don't know." And I can tell you, as a professor who worked with many, my job in universities was to help international students, usually from Asia, accommodate and acculturate to American culture. And I can tell you that my main job was to help them understand that when you come here to an American university, you are supposed to be asking questions. You're allowed to challenge a professor. You're allowed to speak up. You're allowed to speak your mind, and you're supposed to have something different to say. That those are bad. So you can imagine, let's go back to the story. So you have this Swedish egalitarian boss doing his absolutely best with his own toolkit, and basically he had people on his team request to leave. And one of the reasons they requested to leave is they were afraid about the safety of this particular unit. I'll give you another example. The egalitarian manager, guess where he decided to hold his office?
What do you mean? Second floor, top floor, at the beginning and near the entrance?
So what happened was this egalitarian leader said, "I'm going to put my workspace in the middle of everyone else's workspace." Because he was coming from a land where it's a big, open, giant cavern of desks and the boss is over here and you can just kind of walk over to him. And they have that in the United States too. And the people in China were expecting him to have a separate office on a separate floor to show the importance of their unit. And by working there with him, by this Swedish manager working in the midst of all of his workers, his employees, in the middle of the floor, he was sending the message to the workers and the rest of the company that his department was not important.
Well, I think the two examples are so important because they show how clear culture define your identity and also define the way people understand your leadership style.
Yes. So one thing,
Can you give an example for Israeli American clash
yes.
like that?
Yes. So I can think of a number of times. Again, often when we talk about Israelis, I think the thing that tends to come up the most is that they are willing to be direct in their interactions with anyone, including supervisors. So that's what gets brought to my attention the most. This notion of being less formal, and it can be off-putting to an American boss, and it can certainly be off-putting if your boss happens to be in France or happens to be in Asia. So yeah, that's
so they'll communicate with hierarchy managers directly instead of asking their managers to do that work for them. That's what you mean?
Or they might, for example, say, again, I don't know if that's such a great idea. Let's try this other idea. Because, Israelis come from a place where you sit around the table, and if you have an idea, you say it because you're contributing to the group. It doesn't necessarily matter as much what your rank is. And again, I don't know if Israelis feel that themselves, but I can tell you that people from the outside looking in see that. Here's another thing. It would be more comfortable for an Israeli to give a suggestion or ask someone to do something or give a negative feedback in front of a group. Now, of course, Israelis have one-on-ones. I mean, absolutely. And that's kind of a sign of like, let's get this done, tachlis, right? Let's get this done. Let's, just jump in. Whereas a more hierarchical culture, that would happen in a one-on-one. You wouldn't want to embarrass your boss. You wouldn't want to make your boss or leader lose face. And that can really lead, again, once a boss thinks that an employee is being disrespectful, everything they do after that will be viewed through the lens of being disrespectful.
So if I'm an Israeli and I have a meeting with the rest of the team or and my boss, it would be better if I say my opinion, but not to criticize my manager in front of everyone.
Especially at the beginning, I've always made the point, be very careful when building relationships at the beginning, critique, and especially the way you say it. Again, it might be something you'd like to do just quickly one-on-one afterwards. Yeah.
I have, because I see that we are reaching the end of our chapter. If you can give us a last tip about dressing code as managers.
Yeah. So I'm here in Silicon Valley. Helly and I are here in Silicon Valley, and it's actually pretty informal. You've got that American mystique of this startup master coming into work with his jeans and flip-flops. So Israelis do very well here because Israelis don't seem to mind being less formal. But if you're in New York City, if you're in Chicago, a big city, a more formal business like anything legal, financial, put on a pair of pants, button-up shirt, maybe not a tie, but at least a long sleeve shirt. I don't like to police or suggest to women how they should dress, but I guess, follow the same rules. It doesn't have to be a suit if you're in New York or Chicago, but look, it never hurts to show. Americans will see dressing in a nice shirt with buttons as formal and respectful. So it never hurts. I would definitely advise against going anywhere dressed on the informal side for an initial meeting or while you're relationship building. Unless, of course, you see everyone else is wearing flip-flops and jeans. Yeah.
Jessica, we have kind of a tradition in our podcast. We end our podcast with some kind of inspiration. And because you are our guest today, it's your opportunity to share your inspiration.
Yes, wonderful. So I have a quote I'd love to share that I feel really encapsulates the discussion today. It's by Ruth Benedict, an American activist and researcher. And it is as follows. No one culture has ever developed all human potentialities. It has always selected certain capacities, mental, emotional, and moral, and shifted others. Each culture is a system of values which may well complement the values in another.
Thank you, Jessica.
Wow. Thank you, Jessica.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great to be here.